All right, thank you all for coming to our last UNICA meeting today. I know that many of us are in the middle of finals right now, so thank you all for taking your time, for coming and being part of this diálogo. I first want to start by saying thank you to Cheryl Noralez, who is here with us from GAHFU, the Garifuna Heritage Foundation, and to my UNICA members who have worked so hard to have an event every single week, regardless this quarter. I also want to acknowledge the powerful and valid movements that are happening as we speak. We must keep fighting, resisting, advocating, and supporting. And if you all want to know ways to help, please go to our Instagram and click on the link in our bio to access different orgs you can donate to and learn more about the movement. And also this space here today, right? We're gonna unpack a lot of the events that are currently happening right now. As some of you might know, we are UNICA, La Unión Centroamericana de UCLA. We are a student-led organization that attempts to combat capitalism in Central America and internationally by supporting student and social movements globally. And we do that through activism, political education, and organizing. It is very critical for UNICA to discuss and have events that circle around different Black identities in Central America, like the Garifuna, due to constant erasure of Black communities. One of our 6 guiding principles that targets just that states that in its hegemonic attempts, capitalism upholds colonial rationalities that erase our historic identities, including that of indigenous Black communities, to maintain its ideology of individualism. Thus, UNICA recognizes the importance of self-determining our own diverse, fluid Central American identities as a conscious step to objectively analyze our conditions in this world. And also in the spirit of creating a safe and brave space for our members and allies to engage in meaningful dialogue, UNICA asks all of us in our meetings to follow our community guidelines. Here are, I'm gonna state our guidelines right now. So make space for others and take space to share. Raise your hand to participate or to speak. Right now, just raise your hand through Zoom, I guess, and you can also send us questions through Zoom so we can answer at the end. Be respectful to others and avoid antagonistic language. Be open to others' opinions, avoid reactionary responses. Be open-minded, ask and respect people's preferred pronouns and identities. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Be humble, we are all learning and unlearning together. Be mindful of our guiding principles. And also, we are live streaming this recording, so again, just if you don't want to be recorded, just please turn off your cameras. Have said that, I want to pass it on to my fellow Porteña, Nefri, who will introduce our guest speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Nestor, for that. And thank you everyone for being here, for joining us tonight in this very important dialogue, and presentation. And we acknowledge the events and protests that are going on against the lives that have been lost and continue to be lost as a result of blatant racism. And it's important for us to make and have spaces like these, as they're extremely vital in the uplifting and support of our Black communities, not just for Black Central Americans, but for everyone in general. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you all one of the pillars of the Garifuna community in Los Angeles, Cheryl Noralez, who is the president and founder of the Garifuna American Heritage Foundation, or GAHFU for short. She not only works as a full-time psychiatric rehabilitation practitioner specializing in mental health counseling and behavior modification, but is also an activist and promoter of the Garifuna culture. She first conceived the idea of GAHFU back in 2005 when she realized that there was a dire need in the community to reacculturate and preserve the Garifuna culture for future generations here in America. GAHFU's mission and main purpose is to preserve the uniqueness of the Garifuna culture, history, language, music, arts and craft, and spirituality, by working closely with community organizers not only in Los Angeles County, but throughout the world. They seek to enhance and showcase the image and vision of the Garifuna people through education, music, and the arts. In addition, they're also committed to bringing the necessary resources to improve the well-being of the Garifuna Caribbean, Central American, Afro-Latino communities through outreach workshops, seminars, and education. So thank you very much, and with great pleasure, I introduce you, Cheryl.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to this gathering. And so I'm going to go ahead and get right to the PowerPoint so we can run through that real quick and get to the Q&A and, just try to have more of a dialogue than just a presentation, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, are you able to see it real good?
It's loading.
Okay, it's loading.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Yeah.
so are we ready? So let me see. Let me do it like this. So the Garifuna oral history. The Garifuna people are a mixed race people.
Click on the food. Yeah. Okay, good.
Are you able to see it better this way? Is that better for you?
Got it, yeah.
Okay. So the Garifuna people are a mixed race people known historically as Black Caribs. We proudly call ourselves Garifuna because it is our ethnicity and race, which embraces both and acknowledges both our Amerindian mother and African father. There are various theories of the origin of the African or Black people in St. Vincent. The Garifuna oral history proclaims that they have always been on the island from pre-Columbus time, prehistoric time. There are some who believe that the Garifuna people are descendants of King Abubakari, who abdicated his throne from the Empire of Mali and set out to sail over 2,000 ships in the early 1300s. However, most accepts the story of the various shipwrecks that occurred along the island. The various Garifuna origin story. Our Garifuna origin story from the Kalinaku. The Kalinaku are the original people in St. Vincent. Those are the Arawak Caribs and the Garifuna, the Black admixture in St. Vincent. So their oral history is that the people of St. Vincent states that king from Africa arrived with ships of men and took a native wife and took native women as wives. Through the union, the Garifuna race was born. We are indigenous people of the Americas. The Garinagu of St. Vincent acknowledged that the subsequent shipwrecks only added to their population. It was common practice to welcome escaped slaves from neighboring islands who later adopted and embraced the Garifuna identity, culture, and language. According to one of the Taino Arawak historian, one of my mentors, Huacan Fetao, who has since passed on in transition, he was Taino Arawak and also Carib Kalinaku. He said that, he stated that the Taino Arawak and Carib Kalinaku welcomed the travelers from Africa and took them in as brothers. He stated that the Africans and natives did not kill each other off as falsely stated by, in his word, the white man. Huacan stated that there are lies that the white man spread to tear us apart from our brothers. According to the elders, the oral history of Garifuna people from Honduras and Guatemala, they believe that they were always here. Similar to that of St. Vincent, they believe that they left Africa centuries ago and ended up in the Americas as explorers and not slaves. They do not subscribe to the shipwreck theory that they said was introduced to leaders of the Garifuna scholars from Belize who were educated and influenced by the British. In Belize, however, the origin story continues to be that of the shipwrecks from 1635, which again, they received that history from the British, who were the ones who exiled them. The African presence in the Americas as explorers and traders, not just through slavery. The evidence of African presence in America is disputed. Many historians, including Garza, a Malian historian, Professor Salvador Suazo, a Garifuna historian, John Henry Clark, an African-American historian, Carl Euclid, a historian from St. Vincent, and so forth and so forth. As you know, pretty much they all come to the conclusion that there is ample evidence that pre-Columbian and even prehistoric African presence in the Americas. Sightings of Africans Black were reported in Honduras, Panama, Colombia, by conquistador Columbus himself reported seeing Black people in Haiti upon his arrival. And in the Mali griots, the oral historians tell the story, of course, of Prince Abukadi, the same thing that I said, who abdicated his throne in 1311 and went to explore the Atlantic. So there's plenty of evidence that, of course, African people came here prior to slavery. But of course, the mainstream story is always that the only way that Africans came to the New World is through slavery. In the first picture above, that is the Garifuna homeland, which is called Heron in Carib and Urumé in St. Vincent. And prior to the arrival of the African president, the original inhabitant of the island were the Siboneyes, who were there 7,000 years prior to. Then the Arawaks went to the island, and then later the Caribs. And then this picture over here are the current chief from the right to the left. Those are the current chief on the island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They call themselves Kalinaku, but more and more to this day, they're calling themselves Garifuna. They've adopted the name that we call ourselves, but their original name for themselves from centuries ago is Kalina for one and Kalinaku for plural. The Arawak and the Kalinaku were the native inhabitants of St. Vincent at the time the African explorers began to arrive. The Kalinaku, known generally as Black Caribs, that's the name that was given to them by the white Europeans, intermarried with the Africans as they did the Arawak. The African admixture with the Amerindians gave birth to the Garifuna people. Also, consequentially, shipwrecks during the 1630s added to the African presence in St. Vincent. Garifuna people fought the British Empire in several battles and wars to prevent from them illegally occupying and stealing their homeland for the purpose to cultivate sugar to profit the British crown. The Garifuna people battled the British Empire for over 150 years for their homeland. The two major wars were the First Carib War and the Second Carib War, which started in 1795 and lasted for 2 years. It was not until 1797 when the British Empire, along with the support of American fleets, they were able to finally defeat the Garifuna people and later exiled them to Roatan, Honduras. The above picture is the last chief who led us to battle. His name is Chief Joseph Chatier. He died on March 14, 1795. 5 days into the battle, he succumbed to injuries really early on in the battle. And his brother Duvalier continued the battle until we were captured and later exiled from there. As you can see, the picture that's behind me is the same picture that you see on the screen right now. That's the island of Biliso. We were imprisoned there after we surrendered and after we were captured. We were imprisoned on that island for 18 months. And when we arrived to the island, it was a barren island. There was no food or anything there for our people. And over the span of 18 years, we went from 5,000 people who arrived to that island, who were imprisoned on that island, to 2,500 people after 18 months. So we called that our Garifuna genocide because pretty much they left us there to die. In 1797, 25,000 Garifuna people were forcibly removed from Biliso by the British troops and exiled to Roatan off the coast of Republic of Honduras. The Garifuna refugees requested permission to relocate to the mainland of the Spanish-occupied Honduras. The Garifuna people were granted permission to come to the mainland, but only if they agreed to baptize and given random Spanish names, last names. So that's one of the things that people are always asking us. Well, you know, Garifuna people, you say you're not slaves or anything like that, but yet you have Spanish last names. So that's one of the things that I always try to explain to people. You know, the reason that we got our Spanish name is because in order for the Spanish Republic to help us in Honduras at the time, the only way they would help us is if we, you know, went ahead and got baptized, and then they gave us those random Spanish names. That's why you see Garifuna with Spanish last names, and you'll see the Creole people, those the Black English and everything with more English Black names. The Garifuna remained throughout Honduras for 32 years prior to venturing off to Belize in 1802, and later to Guatemala in 1804, and later to Nicaragua. A mass exodus of Garifuna people took place in 1832 to Belize. One of the things that always comes up is everybody always wants to ask if Garifuna is an African language. Over the years, we've had multiple anthropologists and linguists trace the Garifuna origin, their language and everything like that. And to this day, they have yet to find any language, any words that are basically African. You know, they've concluded that the Garifuna-based language is Arawak, you know, which is a Maripuan language, and it is a VSOP language. You know, and let's see. One of the things that was critical is there's not a lot of people who speak the language. As you know, once we come here to America, the first thing we do is kind of acculturate to the, you know, to where we're at. You lose your language. The first thing you do is you lose your language. When I first arrived here as a young person, I went to a private school, and one of the things that the nuns told my parents was, if you want your children to adapt, you need to stop speaking to them in any other language. Because my parents, coming from the villages that they came from, both of my parents spoke Quechua, they spoke Garifuna, they spoke Spanish, and they spoke English. So my parents would speak to us in both, you know, in English, Spanish, and Garifuna, and not too much Quechua. But then in order for us to adapt to speaking English more fluently, they told my parents the best thing that they could do for us was to basically just only speak the English language to us. So traditionally, Garifuna women are monolingual. They have a particular way of speaking the Garifuna words. And then pretty much it's a monolingual dialogue for the Garifuna women, but the men were bilingual. So the way that worked out was that, of course, the boys would stay with their mothers, the children were raised by their moms, and they learned the first tongue from their moms. So the girls would learn how to speak like their moms, the boys would learn how to speak like their moms until they became a man. So depending on what that age was, because for every young boy, it was different. So depending on when they felt that they were a man, traditionally they would take that young man to the men's hut and they would teach them how to speak like a man, the Carib language. So again, the women were taught just to speak like they're women, and then the men were taught to speak both the men and the women dialogue. But then once the men learned how to speak the male dialogue, they were not allowed to speak the female dialogue anymore, and vice versa. The women did understand the Carib, and of course they were able to speak it, but they weren't allowed. It was against our custom for, I know in this politically correct way, it was against our custom for a woman to speak like a man. It was looked down upon. So there's variation of language throughout. And to this day, you know, the way the men speak and the way the women speak, again, we understand each other, but me as a woman, there are certain words that I can't say. And then after a certain age, a man cannot speak the women's dialogue of the Garifuna language. And in Belize, it's not really practiced anymore, but I know probably around 30 years ago, it was still practiced in Honduras of the older men taking the younger boys into their huts and teaching them how to speak the Carib language. So you do still have like a few young men that are like perhaps in their late 30s that know how to speak the Carib language in various parts of Honduras. And I observed this practice in Guatemala as late as 2012, when I went to Guatemala to visit some family members. And there was one of the youngsters that was spending 2 years in Guatemala with the elders, with the men, to learn how to speak like the man, to learn the dialect of the man, to learn how to speak the Carib language, which I thought was fascinating because I was unaware that they still continued that practice up until then. So a little bit about the Garifuna spirituality. Traditional Garifuna people worship their ancestors. Gariniku is plural for Garifuna. So Gariniku believed that the spirituality and living world coexist. The living relatives have a copacetic relationship with the spiritual realm. The Garifuna people believe in Abu no Umaru no, which means I for you, you for me, which is the sacred covenant that the ancestors will watch over and protect the living in this life, and we in turn, the living, will remember them and take care of them in the afterlife. This practice includes the symbolic feeding, bathing, clothing, and paying tribute to our ancestors. Specific spiritual ceremonies are performed for each task. However, today, due to the influence of various religious practices, some Gariniku have turned their backs on the traditional spirituality, which is pretty much common. And one of the things that is very sacred to the Garifuna people is the Garifuna flag. And the meaning of the Garifuna flag, I say the meaning of the Garifuna flag according to my elders, because over the years it's shifted. So I base this on what I learned from my father and from my grandparents, and just growing up, this is what they told me that the flag represented. It was the yellow on top to represent our native mother, and the white in the middle to represent the union between our native mother, and the black at the bottom to represent the union between our native mother and black father. So that was the importance of making sure that we identify not just with our native roots, but also to recognize our African roots. You know, because I know that a lot of the times, you know, we get questioned, I get questioned, well, why don't you just say you're black? Or why don't you just say you're this? And I say, I can't. That's like cutting off half of my body and splitting it in two. In order for me to embrace who I am, my culture and everything, I call myself Garifuna. It doesn't take away from me not cherishing or embracing my blackness, but I can't embrace part of who I am and not embrace the other part. So I stick to Garifuna. Again, as far as the flag is concerned, today there's a dispute of the meaning of the flag due to the Afrocentric influence. And where that comes in is during the 70s, there was Marcus Garvey. He went to Belize, and you know, during that time, it was about the Black movement power and everything like that, and trying to have that Black identity really strong. So during that visit, the flag kind of shifted, and it went like the black on top, you know, white in the middle, and the yellow in the at the bottom. And it was like a real big thing. They wanted to exclude the white, because at that time during the 70s, like today, it's like, hey, you know, why do you need to have white in there? You know, but we're like, well, you got to have the white because they represent the union, or at least the peace between the two races. But yeah, during that time, it was very, it was kind of like today, you know, the movement to like just kind of like eliminate anything that has to do with the white person. But that white in our flag represent the union between cultures, which is what's needed today in the light of everything, is the union between all cultures, because we don't live here by ourselves. So again, the Garifuna flag, which represents all of us, the flag of St. Vincent. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has 6 communities, 6 Garifuna communities to this day: Sandy Bay, Oweya, Fancy, Rosebank, Gregs, and Rosehall. In Honduras, Honduras has the largest Garifuna population in Central America with 46 communities. Belize has the 2nd largest Garifuna population in Central America with 6 communities. Guatemala has the 3rd largest Garifuna population in Central America with 2 communities, and Nicaragua has the smallest Garifuna population in Central America with 2 communities. In the United States, New York has the largest Garifuna population with an estimated over 200 to 300,000 Garifuna people in New York alone, throughout the Bronx and Brooklyn. And Houston has the 2nd largest Garifuna population in the United States. It used to be New Orleans, but after Katrina, a lot of the Garifuna people that were in New Orleans moved to Houston, Texas, and all that stuff. And then California has the 2nd largest Garifuna population with an estimate of between 80,000 to 100,000. And we also have a large Garifuna population in Chicago. And we're starting to have a good population in Seattle, Washington as well. Again, Garifuna people first arrived in Honduras April 12, 1797 after being exiled by the British around 1802 under the leadership of Marcus Sanchez Diaz. The first documented arrival of Garifuna in Belize is 1804, although it's speculated that a small group arrived earlier in 1802. And again in 1832 was the mass exodus of Garifuna under the leadership of Elijah Benny. So these are some of the traditional Garifuna food. Garifuna people, our food is technically what you call today organic food, organic eating.
Cheryl, it's kind of breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat what you were saying?
Oh, I was saying that. So this is our typical Garifuna food. Is that better? So okay. So our Garifuna food typically consists of ground food, like the plantain, the yuca, and anything that comes from the ground. And typically we were basically we ate and anything from the sea. According to the tradition, we rarely ate like red meat and chicken and stuff like that. We only ate like once a year or something for special occasions, weddings, funerals, whatever. But typically our food consisted of ground food.
Breaking up a little bit. Try to repeat that part.
Yeah, so traditionally our food consisted of the ground food. Like the first dish that you're seeing on the upper left corner, I believe on your screen, is called bundiga. And that's
You're breaking up.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. So I think I need to get closer to the mic. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Yes? Okay. So that dish is consisted with coconut milk, and something that's clear, and then you mix. And the other thing that I like to point out is the tukunu. The tukunu is also, that's actually grated cassava, and then you make it like male. And that's like one of my favorite things, so I included it in this slide. And then we have various other food. A lot of our food is made out of cassava. You can see the cassava cake over there is grated and it's made out of cassava. So a lot of our food is made out of cassava, and we eat a lot of coconut milk and and just a lot of ground food from the ground to our plate. One of the things that we under GAHFU advocated for was to have a national.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we could just go ahead and go into the Q&A because the last screen was just basically the declaration that we did with the city of Los Angeles. Like I was saying, that one of the things that was important to us is that every time it comes to Garifuna people, the one thing that we constantly got was that just identify yourself as African American. And it was very important for us to let them know we do embrace our African heritage, but that we are also, Garifuna. We have our own language, we have our own history, we have our own foods and traditions and everything like that. So we petitioned the city of Los Angeles to recognize November as Garifuna Heritage Month, because that is the month that Guatemala, Belize, and Nicaragua all celebrate their settlement day to their country. And in April, Honduras celebrates their settlement day into Honduras. So one of the things during Garifuna Heritage Month is that we do a lot of workshops to introduce people to our culture, because a lot of people, of course, do not know who we are. They only see us as another African American group, and then we just basically do workshops to immerse people and tell them about our culture, introduce them to our food,
and just for them to get to kind of know us on a one-on-one basis. And, you know, that's very important for us, and it's very important for our kids, because then they get to learn about, you know, their drumming, their roots, their heritage, and their history, instead of just kind of being lumped up under the umbrella of just African American. You know, it's important for us to embrace our identity. And then the other screen was just basically of just the various activities. Nefri, do you have the screen stuff? Okay. So the other events that we've done throughout the Garifuna community, I guess one of the things that we do that's very important for us is education. So throughout the year, we do the things that we're doing like right now, having dialogue and doing workshops, going to various universities and schools to talk about who we are. We go to various museums where we do pop-up museums, and we take miniature artifacts of our everyday things that we do to share with the community, so they could learn again about who we are as a people. And yeah, that's just one of the things that, you know, we've done. We advocate for Garifuna to be included in the various Central American events, because unfortunately, although we are Central American, we're usually an afterthought. We're not included, even though during times like the census, one of the things that we're encouraged to do is, hey, make sure you vote Latino. But it's like, yeah, we vote Latino, but you don't think about us when it comes to like the everyday things, you know, when it comes to including us into the events that are happening in the Latino community here in Central America, or, you know, in the Central American community, we're always usually an afterthought. And vice versa, when it comes to the census for the African Americans group, and they're like, hey, you need to identify as Black. And it was like, but you don't come to us, and we're always an afterthought. We're not even thought of until every 10 years when it comes to the census, and then you want us to call ourselves African or African American for your numbers. So we're kind of in this weird place, we as Garifuna, of basically having to just make sure that we're not second-class citizen to anybody, you know, because it's either Afro-Latino this or African-American that, and then we get lost. Our identity as Garifuna get lost. So it's very important for us to maintain our own identity as Garifuna with no disrespect to anybody else, but just loving our culture more, to let people know this is who we are. You know, get to know who we are instead of trying to put a label of who you think we should be that benefits them and not us. You know, so that's pretty much my presentation with all this audio technical difficulties. So if we could go to the Q&A whenever you're ready. Hello?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl, so much for sharing that with us. It's
You're
very
welcome.
important, you know, to discuss topics like this, because we are right now, especially, you know, around this whole movement around Black Lives Matters. And I thought it was really interesting that you brought out this association with, like, you know, where does that put you guys? Where does it put the Garifuna people? Where, do you identify it as African American? Do you identify it as Central American, or whatever other identity you may hold? And, you know, it's really important to bring out the thoughts of like what goes on in the community and how you guys identify yourselves, because, you know, we as Central Americans, we acknowledge that we have very complex identities, and it's not just like black and white, like this whole thing that goes on in America. Wait, hold on. If they can mute everyone, that way there's no noise. Okay. Yeah, and it kind of leads to like a couple of questions that I kind of wanted to guide this discussion towards. You know, when it comes to the topic of like anti-blackness within our communities, specifically in the Latino community, like how do we go about having these conversations? Like, so you guys are not just an afterthought, you know, like these communities exist, and it's about time that we start giving them the space and visibility that they deserve throughout, like historically. How do we go about having these conversations with their community folks, not just Latinos, but also, you know, from the other side?
I know one of the things that we've done as GAHFU is that we haven't waited for an invitation. You know, we make sure that we are included as often as possible, because if we wait around for an invitation from the Central American community, oftentimes we won't get that invitation. Like when the Central American parades were taking place, it was like, hey, remember us, where we are Central American too, because they're like, oh, you know, they weren't really trying to include us. And we're like, no, we are Garifuna. And the way that they wanted us to represent ourselves, well, why don't we separate the Garifuna and put, for the coloring, basically put some Black people here in Honduras and put some Black people here under Guatemala and Belize and vice versa. That was their approach to including us. And we were like, no, we're not doing that. We're not walking under, since we're not walking under Honduras, we're not walking under Belize, we're not walking under Guatemala or Nicaragua. We're going to walk under the Garifuna flag as Garifuna, as being part of all the Central American communities instead of being separated like that. So that was the way that we, you know, basically inserted and owned who we were, instead of just basically being color dressing for the various communities that didn't welcome us in the first place.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask, oh.
Sorry. I have a question, and I don't know if this is too personal to answer, so please, if you don't feel comfortable, please don't answer this question. But I just want to know a little bit about your personal experience moving to the United States and how to navigate with the identities that exist here in the US and the identities that exist in Central America. So I would like to know how that looked for you.
Well, the irony is, in, of course, Central America, I could speak from my experience in Guatemala and in Belize. So our experience in Belize, the oppression and the racism that we got in Belize were from other Black communities. You know, it wasn't about skin color or anything. It was about ethnicity, because the dominant group was the Creole people, the Black English is what they call themselves now. So they were the dominant group who basically oppressed the Garifuna people. They got the good jobs. They were the ones that would basically do what the white people here in America did to the Blacks and the other minorities, the Native Americans. That was what was happening to us in Belize by other Black groups, the Creole groups. You know, they oppressed us because we were not Creole, we were Garifuna. And the same thing when we were in Honduras and in Guatemala, it's basically we get oppressed by the Latinos. You know, we're not accepted as brothers, you know, and sisters over there. You know, we're getting killed in Honduras to this day, you know, from our Latino community, you know. And so when we come here, when I migrated here, I could just say that growing up in Belize, because of the village that I was in a village where it was predominantly Garifuna people and Mayan people. So we didn't have any issues. We lived the same way like we did in St. Vincent. Like I said, in the village where I was raised up with, you know, we were brought up to speak Quechua and, you know, to speak with the Mayans, and we traded our foods and everything like that. So it's a different look. But when you go like to other villages, to other towns, the bigger towns, that's where you saw like the racism amongst the I guess the browns and the blacks and the blacks and the blacks. And even when I migrated here to the United States, the racism that I experienced, I'll say racism, is because it was from other Black people. I grew up with Black Americans telling me that I wasn't Black because I didn't eat the food that they ate. I didn't, you know, listen to the music that they listened to. I didn't sound like them. So I grew up all of my life here. Even to this in my adult years, they're like, oh, you're not Black. You know, and it's like, well, I don't know what that means, you know, because obviously I'm Black. But when it comes to the culture, they don't consider me Black because I don't embrace the Black identity and I don't embrace the Black culture. And why would I? Because I have my own culture and identity that I embrace and cherish, because I inherited that from, you know, my ancestors, from my family. So growing up here in America, it was very, you know, it was very, very difficult. And, you know, people in my culture in the Garifuna, we talk about that all the time, that it's like, wow, you know, we grew up here, a lot of us grew up here in America, but the Black community didn't embrace us. And then of course, you know, we were more or less embraced by the Latino community because we had more things in common. We ate the same food. Majority of the time we spoke the same language, but it was basically, if we spoke Spanish, then we were embraced by the Latino community. If we didn't speak Spanish, then we were not embraced by the Latino community. And that's what I could speak on from experience growing up here in America.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, truly, thank you, Cheryl. It's very complicated, you know, to try to understand or grasp these identities that we're faced with, and how it can make a big impact, and the roles that we play. You know, culture, language, that all has a lot to say in like who we are here, because like I share a similar experience coming from a country where you're not necessarily put into, I guess, like have to choose between which side, especially if you look a certain way. Being faced with that as a young child can be very like not only discouraging because you don't really receive that approval from either side, but a very conflicting in the sense of where do I stand in my identity? You know, I have the support back home, but when I go out in public, like, you know, to the with general people, like how do they see me as? And I think it's very important that we start controlling, or we start talking or having these conversations about how we perceive individuals who necessarily look different, but you know, still embrace them and still be open in the sense of like, let's not try to categorize them into one specific role, especially in regards to race, because there's so much more to us than that. Either way, race is a, you know, it's society created race. It's not something that is true or that it affects us because we hold so much social importance to it. And I wanted to say, I don't want to take up too much space because I wanted to kind of address this topic of subcultures going against other cultures. So in the sense of like Latinos going against other Latinos, for example, it could be Puerto Ricans versus other Puerto Ricans who are either born in the island or those who were born in the Bronx. Or it could be, you know, just like Mexicans against Central Americans and stuff like that. How do we go about combating this whole subcultures and like this war that we have that initially ultimately it just, you know, upholds white supremacy? We all have the same oppressor, yet we're a lot of the times put against each other. How do we go about unifying that? I know that was a lot, sorry.
Is that an open question to the panel or just?
No, it was just more of your view. I kind of wanted to
Oh.
see if, yeah, like how would you guide us, or how would, I guess, like your perspective be on that?
It's just a lot. Like we spoke, you know, one-on-one. Like I told you, I did not know that I was a race, that I was a color until I came here to America. That's when I got introduced to that thing. Because again, back home, it was about ethnicities. You know, we were all basically, you know, in that country, but a country, you know, we were from, you know, Belize, we were from Guatemala, we were from Honduras, but we identified by our ethnicity. That was more important than the color of our skin. And it wasn't until I came to America that I was like identified as I was told I was probably perhaps 5 or 6 years old. And you know, one of my classmates told me that I was Black. And I was like, no, I'm Garifuna. Because again, I didn't know what color it was except for the crayons that you used to draw and everything like that. So I came home crying and I told my parents, this girl called me Black. She called me a crayon, you know, and I told her I was Garifuna, you know, because that's what I was raised up to know. What I was Garifuna. You know, so my dad had to tell me, you know, here in America, unfortunately, they don't look at people as individual. They only see you as color, you know, and it's unfortunate. But I was fortunate enough that my parents always taught me and my siblings to not see yourself as just a color, to just see yourself as Garifuna. You know, that was every day of my life growing up. My parents, every single day, in Garifuna, Garifuna Pugia, you are Garifuna. Mama American Pugia, you are not American. You know, all the time, every single day of my life growing up. So every time when I walked out of that house, it was always, I'm a Garifuna person. I didn't need to get permission, you know, to be seen as a human being. I didn't need to feel like I needed to get permission to be accepted into any particular race because I was Garifuna. That was instilled in me. And with my own children, you know, growing up here, you know, again, the racism that my kids experienced was from their own people. You know, my daughter was called a Blaxican. My son was called, you know, he was called, you know, he had to pick a choice, kind of like what you said, you know, the whole thing between Mexicans and Guatemala. And they're like, hey, you know, you know, you're a Mexican. And my son would be like, no, I'm Guatemalan and Belize. And they're like, nah, man, you better say you're Mexicans because there's more Mexicans here. And it's like, my son is like, no. And so he, in order for him to like avoid that situation, he's just like, no, I'm Garifuna. So that kind of quest, like, what is the world is Garifuna? And he said, let me tell you about myself. So he stopped doing the whole, you know, Mexican, Guatemalan, Belize thing. And he just embraced his Garifuna, you know. And then when people get to know him and he gets more into the details of his heritage, you know, he tells them, yeah, my dad is Guatemalan, my mom is Garifuna. And then he breaks it down to them. But he's like, but don't make me choose between who my people are. You know, I'm this. And the same thing with my daughter. My daughter was like, you know, when they had a race war here in Long Beach, I think it was at Cabrillo High School. And it was between the Latinos and the Blacks. And they told my daughter, you need to pick a side. Either you're with the Black people or you're with the Latino people. Pick a choice. And fortunately, my daughter was friends with everybody of all nationalities. And it was the Samoans that took her in and said, listen, leave her alone. She's one of us. She said, Jaleesa, this is, my daughter's name is Jaleesa, this is not your fight. That's between them. You're not even from this country. That's their issue. You know, it's like, that's what they always want to do to us Samoans, is to pick a side. You know, so they told my daughter, you don't have to pick a side. Let them battle it out because that doesn't have anything to do with her. You know, given that she is multicultural, and which side is she supposed to pick? Her father's side or her mother's side? You know, so it's just important to me is that we have to basically, we can't wait for people to put us a label to identify us and ask people to wait for people to accept us and embrace who we are. It starts with us. We have to embrace who we are. And it may be difficult for people to like accept who we are, but you know, it's not for me for you to accept who I am, as long as I accept who I am. It's not for me to sit up there and convert myself to who you want me to be this Black American identity or to be this Afro-Latino identity. I already know who I am and I already know what I am. So it's important for me to accept who I am. And every time I walk out this door, I walk out this door as a Garifuna woman, a proud Garifuna woman.
Thank you, Cheryl. I have a question. Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm also with UNICA. And first, I wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for sharing as much as you did. I'm learning so much, and I appreciate just hearing your perspective on these very complicated issues right now. But it's important for us to talk about and to know about. My question to you is, as UNICA, one of the things that we try to do, right, is to have these conversations and to really talk about the ways that we can also build in solidarity with communities within Central America and outside of Central America. So my question, right, is like, how can we as UNICA, as students, as Central Americans, be in solidarity with the Garifuna people? How can we be more intentional, be better allies to support and recognize and really stand in solidarity with the Garifuna people, both in Central America and then here in the diaspora?
I think to continue to have dialogues like this to continue to your hand. That's one of the things that we don't get a lot of the invitations from people who want to include us in. So just by you doing what you're doing, you know, when we received the call from Nefri to do this, it was like, oh, you know, we're always willing to go and introduce ourselves, and we are always willing to share ourselves, you know, because, you know, we can't continue to be a hidden culture here. And that's what we've been here in America and throughout is a hidden culture. I mean, more and more now, we're starting to like kind of crawl out of our little shell and, you know, be more proud of who we are. I mean, more in New York is like, oh my God, they're so away from being there, because it was basically, especially here, you're basically kind of forced to be African American, and we're not really embraced, you know, again from these, you know, to the Garifuna community, you know, because we're here, we're waiting, we want to be welcome, you know. And, you know, instead of us kind of like, because me, I'm one of those people that's kind of like strong, heavy-handed, and I just like, hey, you know, I'm here, look at me, and I kind of don't wait for an invitation. But like other organizations that are just like, we're not going to go someplace until we're welcome. So I think it's very important with the very scared organizations here throughout Los Angeles, is just to kind of just extend that invitation and let them feel welcome.
Thank you.
Hello? Okay, sorry.
Are there any other questions from anybody in the group right now?
And if you want to ask the question directly, just feel free to mute your mic and ask the question, please.
Forgot to mention about music.
So we have a question from Sarai. She asks, what promoted you, Cheryl, to begin GAHFU? How did GAHFU form? How did it begin?
So that's a great question. So one of the things that I was observing in the community was this kind of lost sense of identity, especially with the younger generation. You know, they were like, I participated in this one event that took place in at City Hall, and I was just observing. And there was an incident that happened that, like, it was about nationality. They wanted the people there to represent the various cultures, the various communities and everything like that. And none of the kids wanted to carry the Garifuna flag. They fought to carry the Belize flag, the Honduras. It was more about nationality than culture. And I was like, wow, that's kind of messed up that nobody wants to carry their Garifuna flag. It was more about the nationality thing. And so I was like, well, why don't you, I asked the kids, I was like, how come you don't want to carry the Garifuna flag? It's like, oh, well, I'm Honduranian, I'm Belizean, I'm whatever. I said, but you're also Garifuna. It's like, you know, and they were like, no, well, you know, no, I'm Black here. And I was like, well, Black, what does that mean? What does it mean to be Black? And they're like, we're just Black here. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, so I went home to my kids and I was like, so how do you see yourself? You know, do you see, how do you see yourself? Just tell me, how do you see yourself when somebody asks you who you are? What do you say? It's like, well, mommy, I know I'm Garifuna, but, you know, here in America, you just have to either say you're Black or Hispanic. You know, I said, so what do you tell people? And it's like, it depends on who asks. I was like, oh, wow. So I'm like, well, if I continue to let this happen with my children, next thing, they won't have an identity. They won't have a culture. They'll just be submerged into whatever it is that people want to, put a label on them on. So it was important for me, basically, for my kids, even though, again, they were raised up here knowing that they're Garifuna, but outside in the world, they needed to be comfortable to identify and embrace who they were outside in the world and not just be labeled. And also with the other kids. So we started off with the Garifuna classes to just basically teach the kids. It was for kids initially for them to learn about who they were as Garifuna, to teach them the basic language, and just for them to embrace their identity. We did drumming classes, cooking classes, so many things so they could feel comfortable about their identity. And over the span of time, the kids went from identifying as just by nationality, they went to identify Garifuna. So when we did, years later, when we did another event, everybody was fighting to carry the Garifuna flag. They wanted to carry the Garifuna flag and their parents' country of origin. And that was a huge difference. And once you learn about who you are, once you learn to accept who you are, you don't have to sit up there and wait for somebody else to embrace you, because you have to embrace yourself first. And I saw that firsthand with these kids. And even throughout the classes that we had, one of the things that we observed were later on when we had the adult class, we had so many Garifuna kids from college. And we're like, well, why are you here? And they were like, well, we know we're Garifuna, but we don't know what that means. Because of course I said, well, tell me your story. And it was basically the same story. Here in America, they only see me as a Black person, so I have to identify as Black. It's easier. But I want to know about who I am so I can embrace my Garifuna heritage. So again, with that transition, we had all these college kids. By the time they got done with our classes, they were out there like, I'm Garifuna. I'm not Black. I'm Garifuna. Because they were able to, they were, what is the word? They were comfortable in their own skin. They got to learn who they were. They got to be introduced to their culture, and they just embraced that. And it was easy for them to transition, not neglecting any part of their identity, not neglecting that they're Black, not neglecting that they're from Central America, but embracing their Garifuna heritage. And that was important to them because they felt that they were lost. Like, yeah, I say I'm Black, but that doesn't mean anything to me because I don't identify with the Black culture. I don't identify with the Latino culture. But once they identified and embraced their Garifuna heritage, it just looked totally different to them. And I think, that was one of the reasons that I did what I did and why I continue to do what I do to advocate for the Garifuna youth.
Thank you, Cheryl. We also have another question from another UNICA member. Her name is Yesenia, and she asks, what were the long-term effects of having the women only know the Garifuna language, but the men know both?
That I don't even know how to answer that because it's still the same tradition. To this day, I mean, we have, well, of course, it's only a handful of men who maintain that practice of teaching the young boys, the Carib language. And of course, the long-term effect is that primarily the Garifuna language is now just the mother's tongue. And really now, I mean, only the older men that do speak the Carib tongue they'll kind of get on the young boys for like, you're still speaking like a woman and you're a grown man, you should be speaking like a man, which is kind of interesting because, it was their responsibility to teach the young men how to speak like a man. But because that part was lost, because we as women can't teach them how to speak like men, it's the men who have to teach the boys how to speak like men. So because that wasn't pretty much carried on, majority of the Garifuna tradition is maintained by the women. The culture, the food, the language, everything is pretty much maintained by the women. And unless you have the men get together to kind of teach the young men right now how to speak the Carib language, it's going to be lost like in the next generation. But of course, the Garifuna language, the one that's spoken by the women, that's going to maintain because the women will always teach their children their tongue. I hope that answered your question.
Any other questions? So if not, I have another question. So this is more related to, I'm interested in, I think all the work that GAHFU is doing is great. And I'm wondering if like right now, with particularly with the pandemic, how has the pandemic, I don't know if you could speak on how it has affected the Garifuna diaspora in particular, if you've seen a direct impact based on the work that you all are doing in Long Beach and LA.
Oh, one of the things that I could just say in general, like what I'm seeing, like in not just here in Long Beach and LA, but I want to see like overall, like in like Honduras. One of the things that had happened, because we have a lot of the older people that only speak Garifuna in Honduras. So when this pandemic came, you know, they don't even speak Spanish. You have the older people that speak like just straight Garifuna. And the Garifuna community got together, the doctors, the Garifuna doctors and everything, and they were able to put together information about the pandemic in the Garifuna language in order to communicate the seriousness of this COVID-19, you know, in Honduras and in those areas in Central America where they only spoke Garifuna, which was very important. And one of the things, if you're following a lot of the stuff that's going on in Honduras, it's the Garifuna people, because they know how to fend for themselves. They know how to maintain themselves from the land. So, you know, between the Garifuna and the Mayans, you know, they're able to continue to live off of the land and help each other out, barter, and just live the way that they lived back in the days. I mean, because at the end of the day, again, in Honduras, you know, it's pretty much, unfortunately, you know, they're getting still killed and everything from the Latino community. But then the Indians over there in Honduras and the Garifuna are able to work together to kind of go through this pandemic. And the same thing in New York, you know, just coming together. And what I've seen, a lot of the stuff that they've done online is just preserving the culture online. You know, doing more language classes, you know, doing more workshops on just the culture in general and maintaining that, doing cooking classes, you know, and just maintaining the culture that way. And even with us, you know, we're doing various things that we're working on to make sure that we continue to do our part in educating not just the Garifuna community, but outside of the Garifuna community about who we are, like engaging in conversations and dialogue like this, doing other presentations. So we're gonna have some other stuff that's coming through that we're working on, that we could continue to do the work of GAHFU via online as long as we need to while we're going through this pandemic.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Guatemala, so when I was growing up, I had many friends, Garifuna friends, who were internal migrants. However, as you know, we've been growing up, and they told me now that every time that they go back to Izabal, they perceive that there's at least in their opinion, the narco traffic being hitting really hard the community because it's on the coast. So there's a lot of presence of, you know, armas, drugs. And that's something that they are pointing that it's something that is hitting specifically the Garifuna community. So I don't know if you have any to add to that, because I only know about Guatemala, but I don't know if this is something that is also happening in the rest of the region.
Yeah, unfortunately, throughout Central America, drug is an issue. I mean, it's a big thing. of course, also gangs is an issue, in our communities now. Once upon a time, we never had that. But because a lot of people who came here, unfortunately got influenced by negative elements, the drugs, the gangbanging lifestyle, and when they got deported, they took a lot of those behaviors back home. Because I could speak on, when I've visited, certain communities, and it's like, wow, this element is there. When I first went to Guatemala, Guatemala is one of in Livingston is like one of the safest places. And recently they had a shooting there, and it's like for 20 years that I've been visiting my family in Guatemala, I've never heard of a shooting in Guatemala until just recently, where it was like, what happened? This is not the Livingston that I know. We don't kill people in Livingston. That's not something that we do. But again, unfortunately, through the influence of negative things that we get influenced, the young people get influenced to here in America. They unfortunately take that back to our back home to Central America, regardless if it's in Guatemala, Honduras, or Belize. I know that's a really big thing in Belize, the drugs and the gangs and everything that you will find. I mean, the first time I encountered that in Belize, I was like shocked. I went somewhere and it was a family member. I was going to a Christmas party, and I wore red, you wear red or green for a Christmas party. And I was told by this family member, like, what are you doing wearing that, that gang color? What are you doing wearing that, that color? This is a blue color. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm wearing a Christmas dress. And it's like, no, they're like, you're lucky, you're my family, because, I would have to, hurt you because you're wearing the opposite gang color. And I was like in shock, because I'm like, when did this happen? When did we become territorial like that, that I can't even wear red in a certain place in Belize, because the gang lifestyle has just transitioned communities out there. It's ridiculous. It's sad, and also with the gangs it comes the drugs, which is also, I don't know, it's just sad. I don't know how we could rectify that, because our countries are too small to have things like that, but unfortunately it's there. And it's just working with the various community organizers to try to kind of nip that in the bud, but it's new to them. They don't know how to deal with a lot of these issues that have been brought into their communities. So yeah, I don't even have an answer to that. It's just to acknowledge that it's there, and that the communities need to work on a plan to try to stop it before it gets worse.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And, just to comment on that, like you mentioned, Cheryl, these are problems that are being brought back to our home countries. They weren't initially there. It was, it was brought back by these youth that are being deported. The problems initially started here, as well with gangs. And we had actually a presentation on that with Stephen Osuna, which is a professor at Long Beach. And all these gangs started here, and they're taken back to these countries. And like you were saying, a lot of these countries don't have the capacity to deal with them, because it's something that it's new to them. A lot of community organizers don't really know how to handle the problem, because it's gotten out of control. They don't know how to handle a problem that didn't even initially start there, and now they're faced to handle it there. And it's affecting their lives more. It's truly sad that that we're faced with this, especially when I feel like in these communities, especially in certain villages, I could only speak from, from my experience in Honduras. It was very, in a way, sheltered, where you don't really recognize that these problems are going on unless you leave, or you have family members that live like in the capital or in other, populated areas. That's just my experience from my side of the family. Most of them, it's when they go visit other family members that they see the magnitude of the problem. Because like I said, most of the time it's very like sheltered within these communities, and also there's that language barrier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really really sad because, like I said, I mean, there's just yeah, yeah. When I was told that that there was a what is it, Boat Trade 43rd game banking territory in Belize, and I was like, we don't even have streets in Belize. How in the world can we have a 43rd Street game banking representation there, and vice versa, and all these various gangs? Pretty much a lot of the gangs that are here locally in LA are the same gangs that are there now throughout Belize, and it's a sad thing because again, it's just it's a small country for that to take place, and then the drugs and everything like that. It's just like you said, it wasn't there before, it was brought over there, and they don't know how to deal with it. And it's only getting worse because you hear about things that never happened before. The shootings, it's like, what in the world, that never happened before, but now in certain places you're hearing about that every single day. So I don't know how to even begin to help them to not allow this to become worse than it already is, because everybody wants to live like, what is it, they want to live like the Kardashians. They want those bling blings, they want the gold chains, they want the $400 Nike, they want the America that they see on TV with all of these things, the influences that they see on TV and on the internet. They want that, and a lot of the times the only way they can get that is to engage in, unfortunately, criminal activities. Kind of sort of here, it's the same story here. The young kids see the quick money, they want the diamonds, and they want all these things, and the quickest way for them to get that is to hustle and to sell. Compared to when we came here, we were taught that education was the key. Go to college, go and get your education so you're able to afford these things. But now it's like the message is kind of lost with the fast pace of wanting things now, that instant gratification, of I want it now. And unfortunately, our youngsters in our Central American communities have also adopted that I want it now mentality instead of delayed gratification, to work for what it is that you want and earn it the right way.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I think kind of piggybacking on what you shared, right? I think you're talking a lot about also just like the culture of consumerism, individualism that exists here, that's really easy to fall into, right? Especially if you might not have or are struggling to figure out how to identify, right? Like, where do they fit in? Becomes a big issue. And I think that kind of building off of what you shared earlier, that's why it's so important, the work that GAHFU is doing, right? To make youth aware of their heritage, of their culture, of their history, and not fall into, any like that individualistic, consumeristic culture. And on that, I have a question from Sarai again, who asks, I noticed that GAHFU offers different cultural awareness programs. Can you tell us a little bit more about what these programs look like? Are they monthly? Are they weekly? A little bit more about that.
So one of the things that we do is like kind of like what we're doing right now. It's like I try to just to cater to what it is that's needed in the community. So I focus on the community. I ask and say, what is it that we need in the community? And then I focus on that. During the time when it was the in regards to healthcare and everything like that, the whole affordable care, those are the importance of community, making sure that they had health coverage, because that's one of the things that observe Central American community as a whole, from all of my various families on the Latinos, and myself included. We came here and of course we lived in the shadows, so we wouldn't get caught because of our illegal status. I mean, I have nobody but Ronald Reagan. Thank goodness that he did the amnesty, that we were able to get our citizenship, but that's another story. But when it comes to being raised up in the shadows, even though a lot of our people now have legal status, they still live as if they're illegal. So they are unaware, or they're afraid to get the social service needs that they require, as far as getting medical, as far as getting just the basic needs that they require to get social security benefits for their grandmothers or things like that. So we try to educate the community, one-on-one or in various workshops if it's online or whatnot. It's like, you need to know that you're not in the shadows anymore, especially those ones who have legal status. Ones who don't have legal status, to try to inform them, provide it, so to let them know, hey, you could get this the Affordable Care Act, for the PPP. You could go ahead and apply for these different things, and we try to educate them that way. And we try to educate them about their rights, as immigrants, and their rights and responsibilities as when it comes to the census. That was one of the things that we were pushing, the importance of completing the census and to be accounted for as a Garifuna. So those are things that we try to cater to the community by, like, what is it that you guys want? What is it that you need? And identifying those things. When we get phone calls of like, hey, we don't know how to do this, and we continue to get more and more, and people are like, you guys need to have a workshop on this, because a lot of people don't know how to access these services. So we cater it towards that, again, not just for the Garifuna community, but just to the community as a whole, because again, we from everybody, like how to access, how to get their passports from back home, whether it's from Guatemala, Belize, or Honduras. They don't know how to get their vital statistic, which they usually required in order to apply for their green cards or whatnot. They don't know how to access those information, so we try to give them a lot of the resources that we're aware of, and try to link them up with the consulate, the local consulates, whether it be from Guatemala, that are there for you, and again, if we feel that it's a need that has to be more grand, we'll go ahead and we'll do a workshop. But in person, we used to do workshop and invite people from the community to come. But in this day and age of online stuff, we're just doing more outreach through the social networks that we have, and just letting people, hey, call us, let us know what you need. From if they have somebody who's at the border, that's like, hey, somebody that I know is at the border, how can you help us help them? We do different things under the umbrella of GAHFU that we don't even talk about, but we try to help our community, again, not just the Garifuna community, but everybody throughout. When I talk about my community, I talk about, of course, Garifuna first, but my Central American community. We try to help our Central American community when somebody comes and it's like they need a job. We try to work within our Central American community to get people jobs, within, our small hub of Central American businesses that we know. So those are the things that we do in the community. It's just we focus on the multicultural Central American community to try to just make sure that we are there to support each other, not just, of course, Garifuna, but just everybody within the Central American Caribbean community.
Thank you, Cheryl. We also have another question. And I think you made a good point on how important it is for Garifunas to embrace culture through education and through music. And so Daniela asks, how do you feel about people from Honduras dancing after they persecuted Garifunas? Do you feel this is cultural appropriation, or are Garifunas okay with this?
I can only speak for myself. I know this whole new thing is like this whole new cultural appropriation thing. I mean, that was something that we were not raised up with. That's more of an American branding and name. Because when we go back, the Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, everybody dances punta. You know, the Mayans, the Latinos, everybody. You know, I don't think that's really a term that's applicable to me, to our Central American community, because hey, I dance bachata, I dance salsa, I dance cumbia. I mean, and I don't think I'm taking anything away from the Latino community. It's just music to us. Again, those are some of the things that, unfortunately, these words that we embrace here in America is usually not applicable to us back home.
If I could add something too, you know, the same thing could be said here when there's a lot of Black appropriation when it comes to like hip hop culture. And these are all like, we do acknowledge that, you know, like our cultures are very influenced by, for example, for Honduras, it's very influenced by Garifuna culture, to our, you know, our gastronomy, to our music, to our dances. But it's not seen as part of that. It's seen as part of like that nationality now. Like,
pretty much.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, compared to like, again, one of the things when I went to, I did a panel at one of these colleges, and one of the professors was Puerto Rican, but Puerto Rican, and she was proud to make sure that she was like, I'm Black more than I am Puerto Rican. And I was like, okay, fine. So she, you know, said, so it was an Africana studies class, and it was a lot of different African cultures from like all over the place and everything like that. And so, so one of the things that she told us, I mean, to our face, and she owned it, she was like, hey, I don't understand that, you know, all of you people, all you different Black people come from different places, from Africa, from Central America, or whatever. But when you come to America, you need to embrace the African culture. You need to embrace the African language. You need to, the slang and everything like that. And we're like, what? You know, and then this guy from Ghana, he raised his hand up and he asked her, you know, so what is the African culture? What is that? Because he said, I'm not from here, I'm from Ghana. I have my own culture. And she said the African culture is hip hop. That the African language is Ebonics. When you come here, you need to transition and you need to learn the African culture, and you need to learn how to talk the African American culture, and you need to learn how to speak like us. And all of our mouths just basically hit the floor, because it was like, are you, and she was a professor, and we're like, are you serious right now? But she meant it. She was like, when you come to my country, you need to adapt to our way of life. And I could speak for myself. I was appalled. I was taken aback. But that was her instructions to us Black people that were coming to America as the new African American, to basically just adapt to the African American culture. And in her eyes, it was the whole hip hop and the whole talking Ebonic stuff. So, you know, like I said, it depends on what it looks like for each, what being Black looks like for certain people. And unfortunately for her, that's what being Black was the whole hip hop identity, the whole Afro and all of that kind of stuff, which is just, I don't know. I don't even know how to, I didn't know how to reply to her then. And I honestly, you know, like the rest of us, my mouth is still on the floor when I think about what she said. Because I just don't know how to even reply to that.
Is any other question?
So you said, babe.
Okay, in that case, I don't know if Sherry, if you would like to make some final comments. Also, we would love to continue to be part of the labor that GAHFU is doing. So if you can share with us maybe a web page, maybe social media, so we can continue to participate. We will love that.
So all of the workshops and things that we'll be doing in the coming months, especially online, will be posted on our YouTube channel, on YouTube, GAHFU channel, GAHFU, on the YouTube GAHFU channel. And then, of course, our website is www.garifunaHeritage Foundation.org. We post a lot of our events, but we don't anticipate having any public events for the remainder of this year due to COVID, because one of the largest events that we did in the community happens in November, but I believe Governor Newsom said that no large gatherings were going to take place until 2021. So we've canceled that event as of now until next year. But again, throughout this time while we're at home, we're continuing to do a lot of stuff. Working on some cooking, updated language workshops where we'll have teachers from Honduras and Guatemala teaching the Garifuna language and history from there directly, and doing a few dance workshops online with various people teaching that online. So all of those things will be posted on our GAHFU channel. And everybody's always welcome to come. And if you have any questions, we do have over, oh my goodness, hundreds and hundreds of videos of all of the things that we've done. We have language classes that are available. If somebody has a drum and you want to learn how to repair your drum, we teach that online, how to make your drums. We have just so many hundreds of classes that are available on the GAHFU channel for free for anybody to just go there and just kind of get to know us, get to know our culture, get to know, a little bit about our food, our history, and everything like that. And, we're here, we're glad that you welcomed us into this space to share a little bit about who we are as a culture. That means thank you very much. So again, Serene, Bandi Serene, thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this.
Truly, thank you, Cheryl, so much for all the labor that you do. It's something that we really appreciate. And as UNICA, we want to just, say thank you for everything. Also, just for sharing so much of what you shared today. It was very insightful, and I can only speak for myself, but I learn something new every single day, and I definitely learned so much from this presentation. And we could only, it's by learning about ourselves and where we come from, where we can know where we're headed in the future. So truly just thank you so much for everything, and we will be posting the recording, or we'll be sending out a link of the recording afterwards this meeting ends, and also just any social media handles and where to find your YouTube channel. Again, preserve the culture and keep teaching and just bringing visibility to the Garifuna culture.
Okay, thank you so much. I know one of the projects that we're working on right now is one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about, but we will be doing a workshop on Garifuna birthing rituals and Garifuna death rituals and things like that. So we're going to be, the traditional death rituals and birthing issues, because there's certain things that we go through that we do traditionally when mother is suspecting after the baby is born, the traditional way. And I know more and more people are interested in how do they do these things the traditional way, aside from what we do here in America. We have our traditional birthing rites, so we'll be doing a workshop on that. So we'll put that, I'll let you know, Nefri, so you could let your people know when that's happening, so we could go ahead and make sure that that gets out there.
Of course, we'll be in constant communication. It doesn't end here. We hope that we can even collaborate in even more future events to just spread the word and bring visibility.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Stay safe.
Really quickly, before we close out, I just want to echo Cheryl, what Nefri said. Thank you so much again for sharing, for being here, and for joining us. And to everybody else on the call, just wanted to do a quick call to action, right? So this is our UNICA meeting of the quarter. It's week 10. We're going into finals. We understand that everybody has a lot to do. So we really do want to thank everybody here for showing up, for being present, and for staying for the whole thing. And yeah, I just wanted to also take this opportunity to invite you all to join UNICA, right? To be a part of what we're doing, and to continue supporting our work. We want to do more workshops like this, right? Where we acknowledge the Garifuna community, all communities present within Central America. But it is a collective effort, right? Everything that we do as UNICA, we do collectively. So if there's anything else that you all want to see, talk about, workshops, invitations, collaborations, we're completely open to it, and we invite you all to help us in building UNICA for the future, right? So, and I also just want to share, right, like we are transitioning now, so we have a new core who will be taking the lead for next year, and they're all here on the call, and they're all in the chat. So please feel free to reach out to any of us, all of us. We're happy to figure out how we can learn and unlearn together, right? Build something, and continue having these dialogues and conversations. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Good night.